Okay, we're back and welcome to another empowering episode of the Company Road podcast, which is the podcast for organizational rebels and entrepreneurs out there. And as we hit our stride in 2025, it's going to be important to tune into where we're at and really reconsider whether we're in the right place in what we're doing. After all, we spend a lot of our available time in the grind and working. And so we may as well find fulfillment and achieve impact in what we do in some way. And a lot of that is to do with mindset and where we situate ourselves mentally. But before we get into that, I can pretty much situate where my next guest is, well, more or less, because I have a lot of family in this part of the world from Vancouver, BC. So a big shout out to the Canadian fam out there. And I'd love to now welcome my very special guest, Fiona Walsh, who is a renowned mindset coach, a change advisor, and a host of the Limitless podcast. So Fiona, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me today, Chris. I'm delighted to be here. And as people can hear now, I'm not a Canadian. I'm born and bred in Melbourne. So actually, Chris and I sounds like we switched hometowns about the same time a few years ago.
That's it. Yeah. I was going to introduce him as my first Canadian guest. Yeah.
We've got 3 Canadian children, if that counts.
Yeah. Fiona, let me show you a bit more about you and the listeners of the show a bit more about you. With over 20 years of experience in guiding transformational change and strategic development, Fiona, you've helped entrepreneurs, senior leaders unlock their true potential to achieve a lot of alignment, fulfillment, and exponential growth in their roles. And one of the beliefs that you hold dear to you, that you hold closely, is in deep self-discovery as a tool to overcome self-doubt and really unveil hidden opportunities. And your work therefore bridges the strategic with the personal side of things and fostering growth that really resonates both internally within yourself and externally within the work that you would do. So you work with people all over the world, from Sydney to New York and lots of places in between, I'm sure. But you've worked with high performers worldwide, and you blend that sort of strategic insight with profound understanding of human behavior. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. I want to hear about your journey, the insights around conquering some of those personal limitations as we all face, and the transformative power of aligning inner and outer worlds in some sort of way, which sounds like a sort of TV show premise, but I kind of want to get into that. Maybe we start with a bit about what you do and the kind of people that you work with, Fiona. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. At the moment, I'm coaching in one-on-one spaces, and I typically coach with high performers in corporate and also people who are founders who have their own businesses, and people who are not necessarily brand new to coaching or who are not brand new to, say, self-awareness work. And we go deep into their inner world. So quite often people come to me with external goals, and what we typically do is get really clear on what they're wanting either in their business, or is it a promotion at work, or a new role in, or building up a new leadership skill. And then what we do is we go through a really holistic integrative process, which starts with self. So getting really clear on who is their true self. So what are their superpowers? What are their values, which I know we're going to get to later? What are their strengths, and what are they like genuinely excited by in life? Then we go into the deeper, darker shadows and we explore their inner critic or critic. So we all have parts of ourselves that are in our inner world, and they're operating in our subconscious part of our mind and body. So we're not always aware of them. And these parts are when you get triggered, say you're in a meeting and your boss says something and you're like, oh, like, why does he always do that? Or when your wife or your kids activate you, that trigger is really something happening deep in your subconscious world. And so we go deep into exploring who those parts are, who are the different inner critics in your world, because those critics are typically holding you back from reaching your true self, aligning with your true self, and they quite often block you. So that's a journey that we go on. It's always a lot of fun. It's quite deep, heavy work, but I always bring a lot of lightness and playfulness and fun to it, because it's much easier when you can laugh at yourself. We're all human and we all have this duality of our true self and then our shadow or ego self. And so it's a process of self-exploration. And what I've found is that once we unlock these blocks and blind spots in our inner world, the intentions and the goals of the external world that my clients come to me for start to unravel, and they usually expand exponentially. So they're stepping straight into the next promotion because they're starting to have the conversations that they've been avoiding or been too worried to have. They're speaking up for themselves. They're way more confident in articulating their value, and because it comes from a place of authenticity rather than maybe from a place of acceptance or approval.
Yeah, nice. That sounds incredibly interesting and also really important. I feel like that you can find out a lot about yourself, but you wouldn't always know how to. I think we always find that almost the organizations that we find ourselves in, particularly as entrepreneurs, and I know that you've been in that role as well, it feels like you almost rely on other people to feedback a lot on who you are, whereas it's maybe less of a focus on you finding that out for yourself, because you're quite often reliant on the outside systems to effectively tell you who you are and what you're doing in that place. So I love the fact that you're talking about it from a self-identification and self-awareness point of view, almost as a starting point. Can you give us can you bring to life some of the triggers and some of the blockers, just so that people understand what sort of things those things might be?
Yeah, sure. If I think about people who might be entrepreneurs, so in the corporate world, it might be that you might have a fear of failure that you're not actually aware of. And so that may get in if you've been put in this great new opportunity, it's like an innovation space, and you're going to have to put yourself out there and take some risks. And the actual pathway ahead of you is pretty murky and unknown, and no one really knows where you're going, which is the world of transformation and innovation. You might step into it full of excitement and confidence, and I'm really going to prove myself. The blockers and the blind spot comes in when the little voice in your head starts saying, "What the hell are you doing? You don't know what you're doing here. You don't take risks. This is scary. Get out, jump." So the job of our parts is to keep us safe. And the part does not want us to change. It wants us to stay in the status quo, wants us to stay safe. And so if you're in a role where you're being asked to change personally or lead change and growth for others and the organization, it's likely that the little voice in your head will start chatting to you, and you may not be aware of it, because a lot of us, and I know this was me, the voice talks all day long. And so it's really hard to decipher between what is just your true self talking to you versus the inner critic.
Yeah, that sort of voice that's in your head that's telling you either you're doing the right thing or you're not doing the right thing. What were some of the scenarios that spring to mind? Have you got any stories from your own experience that feel like they would sit in that camp of either inner critic or where your inner voice is actually really helping you? Either of those.
The switch that I made from intrapreneur to entrepreneur, that cracked open a huge bucket of work that I had to do on myself. And yeah, this is probably like a heads up if anyone's thinking of going out on their own. When you step out of the safety net of corporate and you're responsible for your income, the front and back of house, you effectively become your brand. There's a lot comes up in terms of, for me, it was more around fear of judgment and fear of rejection. So I have done a lot of work myself on overcoming people pleasing, which comes with wanting to be liked, wanting to have other people validate and acknowledge the work that I'm doing, to let me know that I'm doing a good job, which these are all, and also like pleasing others is pretty much a really common trait of a people pleaser. And when I came to, say, launch my podcast, I know that some of the conversations that we're having on the podcast are going to totally ruffle people's feathers, and they're not going to please all listeners. And I was very hyper vigilant in thinking that I could control other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions, and spent a lot of my corporate life thinking that I could do that. And it probably led to too much stress and burnout. But one of the things that I was able to overcome was that little voice in my head when it would say, "Why would anyone listen to your podcast? Who are you to do this?" And then really just noticing it and in the moment and saying, "It's okay. This is a big move. And yes, you're putting yourself out there. You're going to share your story vulnerably and hold space for people to share vulnerable stories. And we're going to talk about things that are not comfortable for people to necessarily listen to. But this is your purpose. This is why you are here." And so to say to them, that's how my true self would then, my inner critic was being like, "Okay, I'll get out of the way. You sound like you've got this." And so just having the inner dialogue, it sounds, if people listening, they might be like, "Oh my God, she's got crazy voices in her head." But it actually does work. You can encourage and be compassionate towards your critic and let them know that you've got this and that they're safe and they don't need to step in.
Yeah, definitely. I love that story. Thank you for sharing as well. And I know for myself, being on that podcast journey, it's terrifying because you're putting yourself out there in the world. You don't know what's going to come back and how people are going to respond. And thankfully, it's been pretty positive. I'm sure it's been the same for you. But the
Yeah.
people that want to say something will say something.
Yeah. And I think the most rewarding things that's come out of my podcast is that each episode you put out there, the feedback you get, you just don't know which part of each conversation is going to resonate with anyone. And it depends on where they are in that moment, where they're listening with what's going on in their life. And so I've just been floored by people like, oh, that was the point of the podcast that I'll never forget. And I'll be like, oh, really? I thought it would have been that. Again, it shows you cannot control how anyone's going to respond to what comes out of your mouth. I think you just have to do it with an open heart and with positive intent and then just let it land.
Yeah, that's right. I had a previous episode with a parenting coach and counselor, Lael Stone, who's quite big.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And Lael was talking, we were talking a bit about the inner child and how how it presents at work. And it was a really good chat. And yeah, I think it's interesting to know what we feel we can control. But also, once you're aware of what you can control, you realize that you can't control everything for one. But it's also knowing and learning how to let go of that little bit. So what you were just describing in the step that you made from inside corporate world into the outside world of running your own business and setting up your own coaching practice, it just feels like that if anything teaches you that you're not able to control all of the influences. And I think as entrepreneurs we find that there's this almost, it was like, I don't know if it's fixed set expectations, or it feels like you're going into quite a constant mode of work every single day, and that the environment is what you know and what you would expect. But actually, if you can get used to the fact that you can't control everything within that environment as well, then maybe it would give you some courage to push into different directions and be a bit more brave. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think the trap that I fell into when I was an entrepreneur as well was because I was still like knee deep in my people pleasing, and relationships was what one of the key things, and connection was one of the key things that made me really successful. And so I became quite hyper vigilant in making sure that I didn't piss people off and that we were giving people what they wanted. But then sometimes you then don't hold boundaries that actually are required. Yeah, that was one of my own patterns that I needed to break because, yeah, it wasn't helpful when I was in corporate.
Yeah, yeah. When you were in that role, how did you go about finding out, in a sense, what was expected of you, and then finding out to the point where you're not only just delivering on that, but almost finding other ways to make it almost your own unique way of doing it?
Do you mean like leading a change or?
Yeah, leading a change or anything where you thought, okay, I've been asked to do this, but I'm going to do it my way.
Oh, okay, cool. So I would always take a brief from my boss, and then the number one thing that I would always go out to the organization and find out, get information on, do people have any word on this? Do they have any opinions, views? Try and get some insider knowledge of what people thought of it or were they aware of it. And then I would use that information to help inform my plan of how I was going to go about leading the change. And usually as well, as I said, I used core relationships to be successful. So I would, in those conversations, also be recruiting people to be like unofficial, like champions within their departments and teams. Because one of the things that is inevitable in corporate is that people like to shut down a new idea, or they all like to pick holes in it and pieces. And so it helps to have those cheerleaders who have your back in each of the teams or departments, so that when that inevitably happens, they can be the ones going, no, I've heard about this is a good idea. This is going to be fun. We're going to enjoy doing this.
Yeah, cool. And you're working with people that are in these organizations now, and presumably they're either leaders or they're on the way to becoming leaders. Working with mainly at the moment.
Most of them are at sort of director, maybe senior manager, director level, and are trying to step up. And then the entrepreneurs are a whole gamut of where they're at in their business and the different revenue targets they have and things like that. And yeah, so in corporate though, it's mostly people who have been leading teams and been in a leadership role with experience under their belt. And they've done leadership development programs before, and they might have even had a leadership coach in their corporate environment. this is really like the fine tuning and the like leveling up so that they can move from the current level they're in and prove their value and their worth and their confidence to the people above them so that they get promoted, or if they wanted to move out into a different organization or industry.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And so almost they're investing in that service from you personally and
Yeah.
working with you on that level rather than it being almost associated with the training that they would get through work. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think as well, I've worked with coaches in corporate, and then I've also had coaches that are independent that I've paid for myself. And there certainly is a difference. Even corporate in-house coaches, there can be some confidentiality questions at times. I know that coaches are not supposed to, it shouldn't come up, but I know that it's always an issue. And so a few of my clients specifically have said, I've turned down internal coaching. I want the trust of an external coach where I know what I share will never leave this Zoom call. And the work I do with people is very raw and vulnerable. And quite often we go places that they haven't been before. Memories come up. Like I do inner child work in my coaching, like you mentioned with Lael. We go back to childhood experiences where people are like, far out, I buried that and I didn't even like really remember that memory. And so it's really about holding space in quite a different way to what I would have done when I was doing like leadership and sales coaching within a corporate environment. You're not going to be in someone's office having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of approaching that, so that in getting started or around some of those steps to deeper self-discovery, what steps do you recommend for any individual beginning that inward journey? And where would they situate themselves for the right conditions for that sort of work to start, do you feel? Does it need to come to a head for it to become, okay, I need to do this now? Can you be working at it a bit more proactively rather than reactively, as some people say? Can you do it like that?
Yeah, I think you could take either approach. If you find yourself in a crisis or you're like burnt out or you've been fired or your partner's just left you, then those would be life moments where doing some self-awareness and self-discovery work would make a lot of sense. I think though, if you're in the crisis stage, just taking care of your health and well-being is probably like a primary thing. So making sure you're getting enough sleep and you've got support people around you. When you're then ready to go into self-awareness and self-discovery, I do say to people that one of the key hacks to figure out where you may have some work to do in terms of self-discovery and maybe healing some stuff from the past is when you get triggered. So by your partner, I would get them to have a journal and be writing down when they got triggered throughout a couple of weeks, a bit of a log, and to start to see where the patterns were. And another tool for self-awareness that I find really simple but effective is around doing like a practice before you go to bed at night, which is based around gratitude. But what's 3 things you are grateful for during the day and why you're grateful for them and how they made you feel. And the feeling part is really critical. It's not just, oh, it's cool that my son won his soccer game. It could be because that made me proud as a mum or whatever. And then we then look at that log again to look for patterns and start to deep dive into what are the learnings. So if you look at both of those 2 examples, to create self-awareness, you really need to start tracking what you do each day, moment to moment, because so much of what we do, we're actually operating on autopilot or not aware. And so the simplest way to get aware is to start tracking different things in your life that you might be interested in, learning a little bit more about yourself.
And does that practice then become easy? Obviously, it becomes easier, but do you feel like people are then more in the habit? It's almost like a muscle memory that people are finding during the day. Oh, I'm pretty grateful for that thing that just happened, and I'm going to write that down. Is it more of a kind of practice makes perfect approach?
Yeah, I think it does. It starts to build. The gratitude one's interesting as well because it means you go to sleep as well and your mind and body and soul is in a place or vibration of gratitude, which is one of our higher vibration energy states and emotional states. And so you're setting yourself up for a much better night's sleep, much better dreams than if you have gone to bed and you've just had a bit of an argument with your other half, or I don't know, you've watched a really scary show on Netflix or something like that. It's actually just, it's really setting yourself up for a restful, positive sleep.
Yeah, yeah. No, good tip, good tip. Yeah, I don't watch a lot of those shows because of that for that reason, but
Yes.
maybe I could if I did some gratitude practice afterwards. I'm not sure. But is there something similar for the start of the day, or are there any kind of like routines or rituals that you talk to your clients about?
Yeah, so yeah, most of my clients, like one of the bases of the setup is to have a start of the day and end of day ritual. And the end of the day one is always gratitude practice. And yes, sorry, I will just follow up on what you asked me before. I now notice because I've done the gratitude journal for quite a few years, during the day, I will like pause and be like, oh my God, that's really cool. Why am I grateful for that? How do I feel? And I just track through the process now. It's also a really good hack if you're in a bit of a funky mood and you just can't snap yourself out of it. Finding something to be grateful for is a simple hack, again, to raise your vibration and your emotional and energetic states. I recommend that for the start of the day.
So a quick question on that. So there's a difference between thinking it as in, I think I'm grateful for this, and actually writing it down. You mentioned journal. Like, is it really important to write it down?
Yeah, I think at the start it's really important. So you want to think it, and then you want to also label the emotion or the feeling in your body that you had with it. That also helps just tie it in, put a bow on top. So there's a couple of pieces to it. The morning practice is a bit of a tricky one because it depends on if you're a parent and how young your children are and if they get up at crazy o'clock. So I still have got a child that wakes up between 5:30 and 6 each day, but my start of my day is to do some form of like mindfulness or meditation. And I use the Insight Timer app. If I'm like in a place that's really quiet, which is not often in my house, I can meditate without an app. But I do find in the mornings it's good. And my early riser now knows that if she comes in, I've got my headphones in, she's allowed to sit next to me on my bed and wait for me to be done. I've trained her like that. That was not the case for when my twins were until they were about 4 or 5. I didn't always have a start of the day, but I would try and do it early-ish in the morning. I'm just being super realistic because I know like when you listen to so many podcasts and people are like, oh, I do 40 minutes of movement and then I journal and then I meditate and then I do all these rituals. I know for working parents, it's not accessible. So just finding the time, two things I would say that I've learned. Don't be a perfectionist about it. So if you miss a day, you haven't failed. Just pick it up tomorrow. You don't need to do it every single day. Just have the intention and then pick it up tomorrow if you miss a day. And also, if it doesn't work out perfectly, like you don't get to the 10 minutes or you fall asleep, I've done that, or your second or third child gets up, so it's just you can't, man, you have to stop. Like, as well, you tried, your intent was there, and pat yourself on the back. And then if you need that headspace, because that's what meditation does to me, it really clears my busy mind for me and helps open my heart as well. Then try and find it another time during the day can be helpful, which again is not realistic on every day, but some days I'll try and find 15, 20 minutes another point in time in the day.
Yeah, okay. So 15, 20 minutes, you reckon, is
Yeah.
about the right sort of time? Yeah,
Yeah.
whenever you can grab it. What about the sort of high stress moment? I saw somebody, I was running training a little while back, and she took herself off to the meditation room in one of the breaks, which I thought was very cool. But yeah, she just wanted to decompress and have that sort of sensory shut down a little bit before she came back into the room, and then she felt reinvigorated. But it was all quite a lot for her in that sense. And obviously we work a lot with neurodiversity being very firmly in the mix within the world of work now as well. So anything around circuit breakers or ways to unwind or relax during the day?
Yeah, I honestly think that the most underrated tool we have as humans is our breath. So you can, and I've got a child with neurodiversity, so you're speaking my language. And as a parent, I've had to teach my child how to do box breathing or when you block one nostril, I can't remember what it's called. And so, yes, just taking the time, your breath is the tool to calm your nervous system. Your nervous system is what makes you feel stressed or like you're racing thoughts. If you've got shakes in your hand, any physical stuff that feels fast and hot and scary and anxious in your body, your breath is the simplest tool. And you can do box breaths, which is breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, and pausing for 4. That's a really good one. Or you can really do a simple one where you breathe in for 3 and then hold it and then let it go for as long as you can. And really, to calm your nervous system, you just need your out breath, the exhale, to be as long as possible compared to your inhale. Because if you've ever seen someone having a panic attack, they're so as much as you can get your out breath to extend, you don't need to worry about the numbers. Just remember, I've got to get my out breath longer than my in breath. And you can do that in a meeting room. Like you don't even need to step into the meditation room. Another one is to just like really ground your feet on the ground. So like really planning your feet and you'll have shoes on, but then making sure all 10 of your toes really connect in with the bottom of your shoe. These are just simple ways. These are very simple mindfulness hacks to get out of your busy brain and reconnect in with your body.
Yeah, no, those are really good. I've tried some of those as well. I went on a breathwork course a few weeks back as well. And yeah, she was saying exactly the same thing. Even if you're in a conflict type situation, you're arguing with somebody and you're shouting, or it's not shouting a lot of the time, but you're feeling the rage basically. You can be doing your breath work and just letting them rant, and you could just be preparing yourself and steadying yourself and grounding yourself and lining up for what, just sitting with your breath and your feelings and preparing yourself for a better state and a better response in a way. And I think that's really helpful. It doesn't feel like you're always prepared for what happens in the world of work. And I think that can really help.
Yeah, I agree. And when you get stressed, we talk about it with my child, but you flip your brain, right? So from a neuroscience point of view, your brain is not working. You're not like, your cognition is switched off. So if you allow yourself to the stress to take over, you're not actually, you shut down listening, you shut down creativity, you shut down all the things that you need to actually survive in that moment. And it's really fascinating, the whole threat response that we go through, because it comes from a very when we were in primal days, when as cave people, if we were like in North Vancouver where I live, we have cougars and bears in the forest over the road.
Yeah, I know.
So the threat response was like, if I'm being chased by a bear or a cougar, like my body needs to like flee. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, my life is in danger. What we now know about our brains and then how that feels in our body, which is our nervous system response, is our human brains do the same thing in social interactions that they used to do when you were getting chased by a bear. So you might be sitting in a meeting room and someone's, "Hi, Chris, I'd love to give you some feedback on how you showed up in that meeting the other day and you showed up poorly." Your brain and body starts to respond in exactly the same way as if you were being chased by a cougar. And so knowing this about what's actually going on for us can be really helpful, because you're like, I'm safe, take a few deep breaths, I'm not being chased. You know what I mean? Ground your feet, do your breathing. Or I always say to my clients as well, if you're actually feeling rattled, it's totally fine to be like, I'm going to need a little bit of time, I'm feeling a bit stressed, I'm feeling a bit anxious, I need some time just to calm down. Can I come back to you in a short amount of time? So you're just asking for some space to regulate your nervous system so that you can come back and show up as your best self.
Yeah, yeah. Can I ask, have you been chased by a cougar in North Vancouver?
No.
No. You've seen a bear? You must have seen a bear.
Yeah, we have bears often. I live close to the forest, so in the summertime we have bears over here. They're like big dogs. They're like scroungers, so they want to get into any bin or any food. Yeah, but cougars, no. Last winter we had a mama and 3 cougar cubs that were in our local park living for 3 months, which is quite unheard of and was quite scary. Our kids' school they used to if we rocked up to pick up and they had music blasting out the speakers, that was because the family of cougars had been visiting that day and they used the music as a deterrent. And I always laugh, Chris, because everyone in Canada says, "Oh my God, I'm never going to Australia because of the snakes and the spiders." And I'm like, these are people who live in my neighborhood. I'm like, we have cougars walk the streets and bears in daytime and nighttime, and you're worried about a little spider.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I've seen Alone as well. I know what's out there in North Vancouver.
Oh, totally.
What was the music
The
they were
alone
playing?
episode where the bears were up the trees was like, I was like
Oh yeah,
totally
yeah, yeah.
petrified of that one. Yeah.
Escaping up a tree. You need to know how to climb.
Yeah.
It's not that bad in the corporate world. What was the music they were using to deter the cougar families, just out of interest?
Oh my God.
Was it something?
One day it was Ghostbusters,
Go
just classics.
classic.
Yeah.
All right. One of the things, the example that you gave was really great. I think from a breathwork point of view, getting yourself ready for responding to that moment. I think the other, because we often talk about these things from the point of view as the recipient, basically. So you feel like you're in a corner and you need to negotiate your way out of that. But also as a leader or as a manager, from the other side, if you're having to prepare for some of these conversations, which can be difficult, do you know of any kind of tips around how to break that sort of news and have difficult conversations or challenging conversations that could result in an adverse reaction, and really helping people set up for it from that point of view? Just out of interest.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, back to the threat response that I was talking about before. So this is a neuroscience model by David Scarf, who's an Aussie, but I studied under his coaching certification. It's all brain-based stuff. So you've got your stress response, or your threat response. You've also got like this reward state, which is the other side, which is where when you're coaching or you're a manager and you're having conversations and you want to engage with people, you want to keep their brain and therefore their body and nervous system in the reward state. So making sure you let them know in advance that you're going to be having a difficult conversation, so that and don't just land it on them in the moment. And even if in tracking in real time in a conversation with the person, where are they at? How are they feeling? Because if they've gone into that shutdown mode, the threat response, which we all do, you're actually talking to a brick wall.
Yeah.
And wasting their time and your time because they're not listening. Then their cognition is juke. Tracking with them in the moment is the most powerful tool you can do as a leader to ensure that the communication is effective.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really helpful, because as a leader, you almost find it so uncomfortable that you want to get it out of the way. But forcing it in that situation, it's a bit like negotiating with a child, sorry.
Yeah.
You're negotiating with your own kid, and we have a joke about it. It's like negotiating with terrorists some of the time, because you can't negotiate with that when you're getting a response, which is screaming or a physical reaction, throwing stuff, whatever it is. But you get that in a way. It's not quite that bad within a corporate setting, I'm sure. But people can't come to the party and they can't think rationally in that moment.
Yeah, and when your brain is in that threat state, you can't communicate, you can't collaborate. So you can't even come up with new ideas of how you might be like, how could we do this better next time? And they're like, I don't know. It's because they literally don't know. They're frozen in that state. And when we're in a threat state, we all show up differently. Like some people will freeze, some people want to flight. Like I've been in a meeting corporate where they were going head to head with someone and then they just stormed out of the room because they were in flight mode. I was more susceptible to fawn mode, which isn't not known as well, but it's particularly if you've got people pleasing tendencies, where you might be going from challenging someone, respectfully, to them, oh, okay, great, it's a great idea, yeah, let's go ahead. But you actually don't think it is, but you're fawning because you're like you're not frozen, but the words coming out are not what you really would want to be saying.
Yeah, interesting. Because flight does spring to mind first of all, but there's that compliance aspect particularly. And it's a weird thing within corporate or any business situation, but there's a lot of, I don't know, it's like a peer-to-peer social norming. There's a lot of comparison, obviously, between people, both overtly or consciously or subconsciously. So I feel that can happen too. You feel like you're forced into a situation, you just go along with it because it's easier. And you're just going to complain to your partner when you get home and have a large glass of wine or something. It just feels like you're just going to find other ways to cope with it, which probably isn't that helpful either. So that bottling up is going to be happening all the time.
And then it can come out at another time in that it doesn't need to your kids, or the bottling up's not ever helpful. I always say, though, to my coaching clients, and this is something that I use myself as well, that if you did fawn or you did say, oh, okay, let's just go ahead with it, nothing's ever one and done. You can always go back the next day to your boss and say, hey, I was a bit rattled in that meeting. I was a bit surprised by what you were saying. It was a bit of a shock. And you know what? Now I've had time to sit with it. Would it be okay if I share my thoughts on it now? And then you're returning from a much more regulated space. You're much more likely to have more positive intent rather than how you might have shown up the day before when your nervous system was really firing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that
Mm.
definitely, that sense of the moment has passed and you can't go back to it is, yeah, one and done, as you put it. It's like it's set in stone, but you wouldn't want to revisit it, or you'd be worried about your boss being even more annoyed by the fact that you're bringing that up again because they've moved on. You know, you should have moved on. It's getting to that feeling of awkwardness. It's a bit of a guilt feeling that creeps in. And yeah, people don't always feel confident going in with something that isn't progressive. It feels like it's a step backwards rather than a step forwards. Yeah. How do you get more comfortable with that, do you think?
One thing I'll say from the leader manager role in that is that you need to be having constant open feedback loops with the people on your team. And if you sensed in a meeting or you heard from somebody else that people were shocked and that there was surprise or there was a lot of emotion in the room, then go back and ask for more feedback, because you may have got sometimes you might have got a bigger reaction than what actually has landed. Like people were like, I don't like that idea, I'm not going to blah, blah, blah. Or you might have thought everyone was okay with it, but then they've gone back to their offices and they're all bitching and gossiping and figuring out how not to do it. So a constant communication and open lines is definitely the way to go, and not thinking that you're one and done. I'm not saying don't overdo it as well, because people will always find something to complain about, but just make sure that if there's close the gap on whether or not, one and done is enough. No, it's probably not. So just use your own judgment. And for people who are intuitive, use your intuition. Usually it's pretty bang on when it comes to people's reactions, or if there's something that's astray that you haven't quite uncovered within your team or your group that you're working with.
Yeah, I always think there's interest in looking at what is feeling like it's almost agreed upon, and where are people aligned, and where are people behaving almost similarly to one another, and where are people behaving different to that in a way. So both of those situations tell you something about what the group dynamics within the corporate landscape are, because you've got the back channels and other things happening, and you know that somebody's making a cup of tea in the kitchen and they're moaning about something, and you can walk in and you can overhear some of that. But it's almost, what do you do? How do you respond? It's very complex. Like from anyone out there who experiences social anxiety, and I feel I've had this myself, it's what am I walking into here, and how should I respond, and how do I arrive at work every day? And it's really hard to navigate. Have you had any stories like that from clients that you work with and help people in that sort of sense of knowing where certainty exists or how to manage uncertainty?
Yeah, there's a model, David Rock, who I mentioned before. He's got a really cool assessment and it's a SCARF model. And the C in SCARF stands for certainty. And this model actually links directly to what I've been talking about, like how in social situations, how we might be triggered or respond in certain situations. So I would usually get people to do the assessment so they can see where they are on the certainty scale. What are we doing? We're creating self-awareness. I remember when I was consulting last year, one of the leaders I was working like side by side with, she had such a high tolerance for uncertainty. And I was like, that's why you're like such a superstar in digital transformation, because there is zero certainty. It's just like the unknown every day, swimming through murky water and hoping you find what you're looking for, and having things thrown at you constantly, versus someone who has a really low tolerance for uncertainty. And yes, I have coached those people, and they tend to have either high functioning anxiety or just medical diagnosis of anxiety, because they are trying to control the situation, and it is very hard on their nervous system to come into work every day. I think that people like that need to be aware of it and make sure that they choose roles that can give them more certainty day to day. So I wouldn't go into anything that's innovation or transformation where you're evolving phase to phase or sprint to sprint, because you can't plan and predict what's going to happen in the next 3 months. So making sure you choose a role that really plays to your strengths. And because I found that people who like a lot of certainty can be really sturdy performers in some operational roles, and they actually shine really brightly once they find the right role for them, rather than trying to operate in a state of anxiety, which is, it's challenging to reach your true potential if you're anxious at work every day.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think you're right for sure. Yeah, it just reminds me of some work that I've done work in the transformation space, and often in that kind of uncertain area as well. I think there's something to be said for really naming what people are going through, particularly within a group context, so that people understand the direction that you're going, and whether you might be in a divergent stage where, yeah, it's okay to come up with as many ideas as possible and let's all have some fun doing that. And then you need to converge on something that's really important and actually make a decision so that you can move past a particular gate or a milestone and get to the next stage. So it feels some people might be expecting certainty at points of uncertainty, or vice versa. And as a leader or an emerging leader, you need to manage that. You just need to help people understand the situation that they're in within a meeting context, within a workshop context, or even a conversation, and then just move them, always signpost it a little bit so that it becomes a bit more understandable, a bit more relatable. And then I think I've seen really positive results from that too, because people that do have a kind of inclination for certainty, all of a sudden you take the shackles off and they're in a workshop environment, or they're able to just throw out their ideas in a more carefree manner, and they're really happy. It feels really liberating for them as well at times. So I think it's setting expectations, obviously, but
Yeah, I think also, as you said, don't let it become the elephant in the room. I think when things are uncomfortable, there's discomfort at work, it's really important to talk about it and talk about ways to move through discomfort. Emotions that come up don't last more than 90 seconds, but if we numb them or push them aside, which is normally the corporate way of dealing with like negative emotions, they will come back to bite you. And yeah, I think that leaders do, it's their job to be sturdy and to, as you say, provide as much certainty as possible. And if there's, or scaffolding is the other one, give people, I can give you this and we're going to bounce around between these two scaffolding pieces, but never over communicate certainty if it's not there, because that actually rattles people way more.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, as we come to the close, I wanted to maybe just start or end with a fairly big question, because obviously you work with a lot of people around the world. And I think that you're going to have, I do the same thing. I work with a lot of businesses, work with different people that I mentor and coach. And you get a read for what's going on in different industries a little bit, and what people are experiencing. So it's probably a question around that, around what you're hearing as being within the world of work in particular, not so much about entrepreneurs, but what are the big things that you're seeing is still needing to change within the world of work? And yeah, have you got any kind of sense of what those themes are?
I think it's a couple. One would be that there's a lot of talk at the moment about post-COVID. You know how when we're at home and we're all laid there and we had kids on our lap and dogs peeing next to us while we're trying to facilitate calls with 150 people. And then people have come back to the office. And I think there's a lot of talk about people wanting to bring their whole self to work, but then bringing things to the workplace that might actually be better suited with a coach or with a therapist. And I'm hearing a little bit more like that. So my coaching clients wanting me to work with people on their team, because they're bringing stuff that like no one used to bring this to work before. And so I think that's one that's interesting that's come up, which might be particular to the kind of work that I do. But yeah, people bringing things into the workplace that maybe, and it's also an opportunity for leaders to establish some fresh boundaries around, I'm here to support you, but I have boundaries around X and Y. And we either have an EAP program that can help you, or like we can get you a coach or a therapist. So just making sure that people feel supported through all the uncertainty that is in the world. The other piece that's been really relevant for over here in North America has been, and I don't want to go into it because I don't talk politics, but Trump being voted in caused a huge ripple effect across North America. And being in Canada, we're just over the border. We do feel it a lot. And there was a lot of despair, I would say, and like really negative emotions about what could be. So that really rattled people in the last sort of month, I would say. But I think people are coming out of it now, and there's some optimism and we've got to be open-minded about what happens. It was just last time Trump was in power, it was it felt like a bit of a circus in Canada watching on, and we were impacted by different pieces of it. And I'm sure it was the same for the rest of the world, that, yeah, watching on at times that we was disbelief of some of the stuff that was being said and taking place. So
Yeah, I get that. You can feel incredibly, drawn into that, both personally, psychologically. It feels like you feel like you would have an attachment, but obviously the lack of control. It's the same within the
yeah,
social environment. If there's a new CEO or a new manager, somebody came in, you wouldn't. It's an unknown until it happens. But
until it
in
happens.
some cases, it is a known, and you're just dreading what might happen.
Yeah, and
Not
in
good.
those cases, like, you need to protect yourself. So if that means taking a break from the media, do it. Like, I did not check the newspapers for the week after Trump was announced, so just out of self-protection. So I didn't go down rabbit holes of looking up the Guardian and all the different news sources, the New Yorker and everything. Put boundaries in place for yourself. If it's making you feel stressed, then you're your own boss at the end of the day. And yeah, put some boundaries in place so that you can shut out the data coming in. Because that's one of the biggest issues of this information age, is that we're just overloaded with information. So if we don't have good boundaries ourselves around what we're allowing into our mind, it can create swirl and a lot of stress that is, and like with US politics, like most of your listeners and me included have zero control over anything that's happening in that space. So us actually thinking about it is not the best use of our time or our brain or emotional capacity.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and it was just very matter of fact. He's going to be in. There's going to be a term. It's 4 years. It'll be somebody else after that. Maybe not. It's easy to distance yourself if you can, or if you know how to. But yeah, boundaries is really important, particularly as more and more is coming in, as you say. So I think having a healthy, ongoing reset or ongoing boundary setting here and there, being aware of your habits and what you feel is triggering you, like I was saying before, is all very important. Yeah, really good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, I think also one last thing is to
Yeah.
be aware of, if you've got a really strong sense of purpose and why you're here. And if you're like, for you, it might be this podcast. For someone else, it might be an offer that they're launching. That if you've got a really strong purpose that comes from your values and from your heart, that is where you should be investing your time and effort. And really, if other things are distracting you that you have zero control over, then you're in your best interest to block it out and just stay razor sharp focus on what your purpose is. Because what, at the end of the day, when you die, you're going to look back and be like, oh my God, I'm so proud that I did that and I caused that ripple effect. I served people in a way that I know I was here. No one's going to sit there and think, oh, I'm so happy I read all those Trump articles.
Yeah, I think regret is incredibly powerful. You think back to wasted time, or it's when you're older and you think, but I wish I'd done that when I was younger, or if I'd done this sooner. And it's hard one, right? You can focus on the future so much, but obviously a lot of people are feeling a deep sense of regret.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Great. Yeah, we'll wrap there. Thanks so much for coming onto the show, Fiona. Really enjoyed the chat. We've gone into a lot of different areas, and yeah, a lot of it is going to be memorable to me, and I'm sure to the listeners out there as well. And of course, every time I hear Ghostbusters theme tune, I'm going to be triggered by that. I'm going to be thinking of cougars running after me. No, I won't. But yeah, really appreciate you coming onto the show. Thanks so much for joining us from Vancouver. And yeah, have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I really enjoyed our conversation today.